I got the text on a Thursday afternoon, right in the middle of my lunch break, standing by my car with a paper bag from the deli downstairs. Inside was a mediocre turkey sandwich I'd already taken 2 bites out of. Nothing about the moment felt important until my phone vibrated. It was from my boyfriend. "Hey, babe. I've been thinking, and I've decided I'm going to move in with my professor for a while to focus on my studies. Don't be insecure about this. It's a career opportunity. Love you." I stared at the screen. Once. Twice. Then again, slower, like maybe I'd misread a word. Move in. With his professor, don't be insecure. The parking lot noise faded into a dull hum. I became acutely aware of my breathing, shallow and uneven, the way it gets right before your body realizes something is wrong. My fingers felt numb around the phone, as if it might slip out of my hand. His professor was a woman, married, in her late 40s, someone he'd been talking about constantly for months. How brilliant she was, how inspiring, how much she believed in his potential. I'd told myself it was normal. Academic mentorship, networking. I didn't want to be that girlfriend. So I swallowed the discomfort every time. But standing there in the heat, sandwich going cold in my other hand, that message landed differently. It wasn't a discussion. It wasn't a question. It was a decision, already made, followed by a warning about how I was supposed to feel. Or rather not feel. What made my stomach drop even harder was the timing. 3 days earlier, he'd asked me to co-sign a lease for a small place near campus. Said it would help him focus, that his credit wasn't great, that it was temporary. I'd told him I needed time to think. He'd laughed it off, kissed my forehead, said he understood. Now he was telling me he was moving into his professor's property instead. Something wasn't lining up. I could feel it in my chest, a tight, insistent pressure I'd been trained to ignore. For months, anytime I questioned anything, I'd been labeled jealous, insecure, unsupportive. So eventually, I stopped asking questions out loud and started second-guessing my own instincts. But this text was too clean, too confident, too dismissive. I typed back exactly what felt true in that moment. Good luck with that. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I stopped doubting myself and started paying attention. We'd been together for 2.5 years by then, long enough that people had stopped asking if we were serious and started asking when we were moving in together. Long enough that our lives had quietly braided around each other, shared groceries, spare toothbrushes, weekend routines that felt automatic instead of intentional. We met the unremarkable way most modern couples do: a mutual friend's birthday, a crowded bar, bad music. He was charming without trying too hard, attentive in that calm, steady way that made me feel chosen. When he asked for my number, it didn't feel like a spark. It felt like relief, like something that made sense. In the beginning, he was thoughtful, remembered small details, asked questions, and actually listened to the answers. When he got into his master's program, I was proud of him. Psychology, research-heavy, competitive. He talked about it like it mattered, not just to his career, but to who he wanted to become. That was when she entered the picture. His thesis advisor, a respected professor in the department, married, established, someone with influence. At first, she was just a name that came up in passing. Then she became a presence. Dinners to discuss research, late-night messages about revisions that somehow couldn't wait until morning, conferences that always seemed to require the two of them to travel together. The first time I said something out loud, I chose my words carefully, too carefully, in hindsight. We were in my kitchen, the evening quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. He was scrolling through his phone, half listening, the way people do when they're already sure the conversation isn't going to matter. "She texts you a lot," I said, keeping my tone neutral, observational. "Even late at night." He didn't look up at first, just shrugged. "She's my professor," he said flatly. "Nothing inappropriate is happening. Honestly, it's kind of insulting that you'd even suggest it." That word, insulting, landed harder than I expected. Like I'd crossed some invisible line just by noticing what was happening right in front of me. "I wasn't accusing you," I said quickly. "She's married," he cut in, finally looking at me, irritation flashing across his face. "And this is about my future. You're reading way too much into it." The conversation ended there, not because I felt reassured, but because I felt embarrassed, ashamed even. I replayed it later in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd projected something onto a situation that didn't deserve it. So I stopped bringing it up. But stopping myself didn't stop the unease. Instead, I started noticing things in silence. The way he angled his phone away from me when her name popped up on the screen. How he'd excuse himself to take her calls in another room, voice low, door half closed. How he'd come home from research meetings, smelling like expensive perfume that didn't belong to either of us. Their academic discussions rarely happened in academic places, wine bars, dimly lit restaurants, places that didn't feel accidental. Once he came back from a weekend conference and casually mentioned that it had been just the two of them. No cohort, no other students, no department dinners, just him and her, traveling together, sharing meals, talking about his work for hours. I swallowed my reaction, told myself I was being dramatic. The second time I tried to talk about it, I framed it differently, softer, more supportive. I just want to make sure there are boundaries, I said, for your sake. He laughed, sharp and humorless. Boundaries? He repeated. She's helping me graduate. Do you want me to sabotage my own career because you're uncomfortable? That was the moment I learned how easily concern could be turned into guilt. After that, the message was clear. If I questioned anything, I was unsupportive. If I hesitated, I was insecure. If I trusted my instincts, I was the problem. So I adjusted. I told myself relationships required compromise. That ambition came with sacrifices. That trusting your partner sometimes meant silencing the part of you that felt uneasy. Still, patterns have a way of surfacing, no matter how hard you try not to see them. The late nights became routine. The defensiveness sharpened. His patience for my questions disappeared entirely. And then came the lease. He asked me to co-sign like it was a favor I owed him, framed it as temporary, responsible, said his credit wasn't great yet, said it would help him focus, give him space to work without distractions. $850 a month, near campus, a small place. I remember opening the document and feeling that same tight pressure in my chest, the one I'd learned to ignore. I told him I needed time. He smiled, said he understood. 3 days later, I got the text about moving in with his professor. And suddenly, all those small moments, the dismissals, the late nights, the lease, clicked into place. This wasn't me being insecure. This was me being slowly trained not to trust myself. After I sent good luck with that, I didn't immediately do anything dramatic. I didn't cry. I didn't call a friend. I didn't pace my apartment spiraling into theories. I sat in my car with the engine off, the sandwich untouched on the passenger seat, and reread his message again. This time not as his girlfriend, but as someone trying to understand a set of facts. He was moving in with his professor. She was married. He'd asked me to co-sign a lease 3 days earlier, and he'd warned me not to be insecure. That last part stayed with me. It wasn't reassurance, it was instruction. I unlocked my phone and opened my email. The lease was still there, exactly where he'd left it. He'd forwarded it to me with a casual, "Can you take a look?" already signed on his end. I hadn't opened it properly before. I'd been too busy debating whether I was being unsupportive. This time I read every line. The rent itself wasn't shocking, but the address gave me pause. It didn't match what he'd described as a small place near campus. I copied it into a new tab and pulled up the county assessor's website. Public records, free access. It took less than 20 minutes. The so-called studio wasn't a studio at all. It was a 2-bedroom condo in a nicer part of town. And the owner listed on the deed wasn't some random landlord. It was his professor. Her name was right there, and beneath it, listed as co-owner, was her husband. I sat back in my seat, staring at the screen, my pulse thudding so loudly it felt like it filled the car. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't poor communication. It wasn't a gray area. He hadn't been asking me to co-sign her property. He'd been asking me to legally guarantee rent on a condo owned by his professor and her husband, so she could move him in, collect rent, and keep me financially responsible if anything went wrong. The implications stacked up fast. If his arrangement with her worked out, he'd be living comfortably, focused on his career, protected. If it didn't, I'd still be on the hook for the lease, paying for a place I didn't live in, owned by the woman he was entangled with and her spouse. My hands started shaking as I closed my laptop. I wasn't angry yet. I was stunned. The sheer audacity of it all felt unreal. Months of late nights, the dismissals, the carefully framed conversations, the lease arriving at exactly the right moment. This wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. I thought about every time I'd been told I was reading too much into things, how insulting it was to even suggest something inappropriate, how this was about his future, not my feelings. I took a slow breath and made a decision. Some people would call what I did next petty, I call it factual. I searched for her husband online. LinkedIn made it easy. Hospital administrator, accomplished, professional, the kind of man who deserved to know what was happening inside his own marriage. His workplace listed a public email address. I opened a new message and typed carefully. No accusations, no emotion, just facts. I explained who I was, what my boyfriend had told me, that he was planning to move into a property his wife owned, that he had asked me to co-sign the lease without disclosing who the owners were. I attached screenshots, the text message, the lease agreement, the public property record. I reread the email twice, removed anything speculative, and hit send. My heart pounded hard enough to make me lightheaded. Then I blocked my boyfriend's number. Not out of spite, but because I knew exactly what would come next once he realized what I'd done. The rewriting, the minimizing, the accusations. I went back to work, but the rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I kept expecting my phone to explode in my hands. It didn't. Not that day. But 3 days later, everything detonated at once. 3 days later, my phone started vibrating nonstop. I hadn't blocked him everywhere, just his main number. At the time, I thought leaving one door open made me reasonable, mature. By Friday afternoon, my Instagram inbox was a mess of frantic messages stacked on top of each other. We need to talk, you're overreacting, this doesn't have to change anything between us, lol. The lol made my stomach turn. Like this was a misunderstanding. Like he hadn't just tried to maneuver me into a financial trap while planning to move in with another woman. I ignored all of it. At around 8 that night, I was in my kitchen making dinner. Spaghetti carbonara. Comfort food. Something grounding. The smell of garlic and bacon filled the apartment, the familiar routine steadying my hands. Then I heard the door. The lock turned, the door opened. I froze, wooden spoon mid-stir. He walked in like he still belonged there. That was my mistake, never changing the lock sooner. What did you do? He demanded, voice already sharp, already angry. I didn't turn around right away, just kept stirring the sauce. Pasta, I said calmly. Want some? He was shaking. I could see it in my peripheral vision. His face flushed red, eyes wide, jaw clenched. You contacted her husband, he said. Do you have any idea what you've done? I turned slowly, resting the spoon on the counter. I informed him that his wife was letting you move into a property she owns, I said, and that you asked me to co-sign the lease without telling me who owned it. We weren't sleeping together, he snapped. It was mentorship, academic collaboration. You were moving into a condo she owns, I said evenly. You asked me to be financially responsible if you defaulted, and you told me not to be insecure about it. Pick a story and stick with it. His expression shifted. Anger dissolved into tears with impressive speed. Shoulders slumped. Voice broke. Mascara free, but no less theatrical. You've ruined everything, he sobbed. Her husband is making her cut all contact with me. I might lose my advisor. My entire academic career could be over because you couldn't handle your jealousy. I felt something inside me go very still. Those sound like consequences, I said. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. How can you be so cold? He asked. I made a mistake. I got confused. She paid attention to me. She believed in my work. She made me feel special. Your work? I repeated. Is that what we're calling it now? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Nothing physical happened, he said quickly. I swear on my mother's life. I genuinely don't care if it did or didn't, I said. The intent was there, the lies were there, and the attempt to financially trap me was definitely there. His face hardened. You're just threatened, he snapped. By my ambition, by my intelligence, by the fact that someone successful actually appreciates me. There it was, the reversal. Deny. Attack. Reverse victim and offender. I folded my arms and waited. When he ran out of steam, I spoke quietly. You tried to use me as a backup plan, I said, while you moved in with a married woman. You lied to me for months, and when I finally caught on, you told me not to be insecure. I took a breath. So yes, I'm cold right now. I pointed to the counter. Leave your key, then leave my apartment. He stared at me, disbelief flickering across his face. Then fury. He hurled the key. It missed me by a couple feet and clattered against the wall. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the silence he left behind. The next morning, I called a locksmith. $180 for an emergency Saturday visit. Worth every penny. But that was only the beginning. The quiet didn't last. It never does. Sunday afternoon, just after I'd finally settled into the strange calm that follows a clean break, there was a knock at my door. Firm. Expectant. The kind of knock that assumes it has the right to be answered. I opened it to find his mother standing there. I'd met her maybe 4 times over the course of our relationship, always polite, suburban warmth, the kind of woman who brought cookies to family gatherings and called it kindness. Seeing her on my doorstep felt surreal, like the argument from 2 nights earlier had somehow metastasized. "We need to talk," she said, already stepping forward. I stayed in the doorway. "About what?" I asked. "What you did to my son," she replied, lips pressed tight. "You humiliated him. You went behind his back and destroyed his academic future." I leaned against the doorframe, heart steady, voice calm. "Ma'am, your son planned to move into a property owned by his married professor and asked me to co-sign the lease without telling me who owned it. That's not humiliation. That's deception." She shook her head sharply. "He says nothing physical happened." "Then he has nothing to worry about," I said. "If everything was innocent mentorship like he claims, the truth should clear that up." Her eyes flickered. "What truth?" That was when I realized she didn't know. "Oh," I said lightly. "You weren't aware? Her husband reported the situation to the university. There's an investigation. Apparently, there are strict policies about inappropriate relationships between faculty and graduate students." The color drained from her face. She left without another word. For a brief moment, I thought that might be the end of it. I was wrong. A few days later, his brother showed up. Big guy, broad shoulders, the kind of presence meant to intimidate. He didn't knock. He stood too close, invading my space like it was intentional. "My brother needs money," he said. "You owe him." "I don't owe him anything," I replied. "He says you kicked him out, took advantage of him." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "He never paid rent. He wasn't on the lease. He didn't contribute to utilities. He was a guest who overstayed." "That's not what he told us." "Then he lied to you too," I said calmly. "Which tracks?" His jaw tightened. He stepped closer. "He can't afford housing right now, because of what you did." "If you don't leave my property in the next 30 seconds, I said evenly, "I'm calling the police." He left. Not quietly, but he left. Then it moved to my job. Thursday morning, my manager called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable, hands folded on the desk. "HR received an anonymous complaint about you," he said. "Claims you've been harassing a graduate student and interfering with her academic career." My stomach dropped, but only for a second. I explained everything. The lease, the ownership records, the text messages, the email I sent. I showed him the screenshots. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "This sounds retaliatory," he said. "We're documenting this and closing it. HR won't pursue something this vague." I exhaled slowly. The escalation didn't stop there. A handwritten letter arrived a few days later. 3 pages. From his father. About forgiveness. About family values. About how I'd ruined his son's future. He demanded I write a formal apology to the university, retract everything, and clear his son's name. I didn't respond. I kept the letter. Then came the worst part. Saturday night, close to 11, my building's security camera alerted me to movement in the lobby. It was him, standing outside, trying to get someone to buzz him in. When that didn't work, he sat on the steps and cried loudly enough that a neighbor eventually threatened to call the police. He left a letter under the door. 6 pages. Rambling, accusatory, delusional. "You were supposed to support me. If you'd just signed the lease, none of this would have happened. You stole my future." I documented everything. Screenshots, timestamps, messages, letters. Because by then, it was clear. This wasn't about love. This was about entitlement. And he wasn't done yet. The hardest part wasn't the shouting. It wasn't the letters. It wasn't even watching his family circle the wagons and rewrite reality in real time. It was the quiet moments in between when the noise stopped and I was left alone with my own thoughts. That night, after he showed up at my building, I sat on the edge of my bed with the 6-page letter spread out in front of me. I didn't read it again. I didn't need to. The words had already burned themselves into my memory. "You were supposed to support me. You stole my future. If you had just signed the lease." I felt hollow. Not dramatic heartbreak, something colder. Like emotional hypothermia. My body had been running on adrenaline for days, and now it didn't know what to do without it. I started questioning myself again. Had I gone too far? Should I have just broken up quietly? Was sending that email really necessary? Those questions crept in late at night when the apartment was silent and my phone stayed dark. They sounded reasonable, mature. They sounded like the version of me he'd spent months cultivating, the one who doubted herself first. I replayed the early conversations in my head, the times I'd apologized for being too sensitive, the way I'd softened my concerns so he wouldn't feel attacked, how easily I'd accepted his explanations because I wanted to believe him. That realization hurt more than anything else. I hadn't just trusted him. I'd been trained not to trust myself. Sleep became difficult. When I did drift off, my dreams were fragmented. Him standing in my doorway again, my phone lighting up endlessly, the lease document expanding until it filled the room. I woke up tense, jaw clenched, shoulders tight, like I was bracing for impact even in my own bed. Work suffered. I stared at my screen without absorbing anything. I jumped every time my phone buzzed, half expecting another accusation, another demand, another attempt to pull me back into his chaos. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on the bathroom floor with my back against the tub, breathing through a wave of nausea I couldn't explain. My hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from exhaustion. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just a breakup. This was the fallout from months of psychological erosion. Gaslighting doesn't feel dramatic while it's happening. It feels subtle, reasonable, like you're the one constantly misreading the room. And then one day, you're alone on your bathroom floor, wondering how you got so disconnected from your own instincts. I called a therapist the next morning. Saying the words out loud, I think I was manipulated, felt strange, self-indulgent even. But as I described the pattern, the therapist didn't interrupt, didn't minimize, didn't tell me I was overreacting. Instead, she said, "Your reactions make sense." I cried then, quietly, the kind of crying that doesn't come with drama, just relief, because someone else finally saw what I'd been trying not to see. Still, the guilt lingered. I thought about his career, his future, the years he'd invested in his degree. I wondered if I was supposed to feel worse about how it all ended. But every time that guilt started to swell, another memory surfaced. The lease, the lies, the warning not to be insecure. I wasn't responsible for the consequences of choices I didn't make. I hadn't created this situation. I just refused to carry it on my back. That realization didn't bring peace, not yet, but it brought clarity. And clarity, I was learning, is often the most painful step before things finally start to shift. The message came on a Tuesday morning while I was at work. No warning, no preamble, just a short, carefully worded email sitting in my inbox like a full stop at the end of a long sentence. It was from her husband. He thanked me for bringing the situation to his attention, said he appreciated my honesty, said he was sorry for the stress it had caused me. That was it. No questions, no accusations, no request for more details. The restraint in his tone unsettled me more than anger would have. A few lines at the end stood out. "If you're willing, I'd like to buy you a coffee. Not to discuss details, just to thank you properly." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to decline. This entire situation had already pulled too many strangers into my life. But another part of me, the one that had spent months being told I was imagining things, felt the need to stand in the truth without shrinking. So I agreed. We met at a quiet coffee shop near my office, late morning, the place half empty, except for a few people working on laptops. He was already there when I arrived, seated near the window, hands wrapped around a cup he hadn't touched. He stood when he saw me, polite, tired. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You didn't need to apologize," I replied. "I'm not the only person affected by this." He gave a small, humorless smile. "No, you're not." We sat in a silence that felt heavy but not hostile. When he spoke, it was measured, deliberate. "This wasn't the first time," he said quietly. "Not the first student. Just the first time there was proof I couldn't rationalize away." I didn't interrupt. He told me he'd suspected things over the years. Late nights, emotional distance, patterns that felt off, but never quite crossed a line he could point to. He'd wanted to believe explanations. He'd wanted to preserve the life they'd built. "The lease was what did it," he said, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "The idea that she'd move someone into a property we own and convince another person to guarantee the payments. That wasn't impulsive. That was planning." I felt something in my chest loosen. Not relief. Validation. He explained that after receiving my email, he'd reported the relationship to the university. Title IX, Ethics Committee. Whatever departments handled those boundaries. He didn't sound vindictive, just tired of being complicit in something he couldn't defend anymore. "They're investigating," he said. "Preliminary findings aren't good." I nodded. That was all I could offer. In the weeks that followed, the consequences unfolded without my involvement. The university reassigned her graduate students. Her name disappeared from the department website. She was suspended pending a full hearing. Rumors spread, as they always do in academic circles, but this time they were anchored to documentation instead of whispers. My ex was left adrift. Without her, he had no advisor, no housing arrangement, no clear path forward. His program put his research on hold while they scrambled to find someone willing to take him on mid-scandal. Funding tied to her grants vanished overnight. I didn't hear this from him. I heard it through distance, through silence. And in that silence, something shifted. For the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't defending myself. I wasn't explaining or justifying or softening the truth so it would go down easier. I was simply watching reality catch up to choices that had been made long before I ever sent that email. I realized then that I hadn't destroyed anyone's life. I hadn't pulled strings. I hadn't manipulated outcomes. I hadn't punished anyone. I'd just stopped agreeing to be used. The system did the rest. That understanding didn't feel triumphant. It felt grounded, solid, like standing on both feet after months of being off balance. I didn't win. I just stopped losing. The aftermath didn't arrive all at once. It trickled in, uneven and relentless, like water finding every crack. The first thing that became clear was that my ex still believed this was something that had happened to him, not something he'd caused. He didn't reach out directly anymore, not after the locksmith, not after the letter, not after the realization that I was documenting everything. But the noise around him grew louder. Mutual acquaintances started checking in. Conversations that began with concern ended with carefully disguised accusations. "Have you heard how badly he's struggling? He says he never meant for things to get this far, Danae. You know, he really loved you." I listened. I nodded. I said very little. Because none of it changed the facts. The university investigation moved forward without drama, but with precision. Faculty committees don't yell. They don't posture. They document. They review patterns. They compare timelines. And once that process started, it became clear that my ex situation was collateral, not central. She was the focus. The findings were damning, not criminal, but unequivocal. Violations of multiple policies, abuse of professional authority, a pattern of blurred boundaries that spanned years. She was given a choice: resign quietly or face formal termination proceedings that would follow her for the rest of her academic career. She resigned. No emeritus title, no graceful exit, just gone. Her marriage followed a similar trajectory. Her husband filed for divorce shortly after the university's decision. I didn't hear details until later, and even then only in broad strokes. A solid prenup, an infidelity clause, assets divided. The investment condo, the one I was almost legally tied to, ended up with her. There was something darkly poetic about that. My ex, meanwhile, unraveled in smaller, more visible ways. Without her advocacy, he had to transfer programs. Not immediately. No institution wants to inherit someone wrapped in controversy. But eventually. A smaller school, 2 hours away. He lost his funding, restarted significant portions of his research, took a job at a coffee shop to cover rent while finishing his degree on a delayed timeline. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't need to. We ran into each other by chance about a month later. A grocery store near my old neighborhood. I was visiting a friend, stopping in for drinks. I didn't see him until it was too late. He looked diminished, the confidence gone, the tailored clothes replaced with something practical and worn, his posture folded inward like he was bracing for impact even while standing still. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. Against my better judgment, I agreed. 5 minutes. Outside. He started with something that might have been an apology, if he'd finished it. "I know I messed up," he said. "I got lost. She made me feel like my work mattered." "Your work does matter," I said, "but this was never about your work." He nodded, like he already knew that now. "But you didn't have to blow up my entire life," he added. "You could have just broken up with me." There it was. The belief that silence was the moral high ground, that I was obligated to absorb deception quietly so he could land softly. "You asked me to co-sign a lease on a property she owned," I said, "without telling me. Do you understand what would have happened if I'd signed?" He looked away. "I just needed security," he said. "Options." "You wanted a safety net made out of my credit score and my trust," I replied. "That's not confusion, that's calculation." He cried then, real tears, I think. Told me he still loved me. Asked if I thought I could ever forgive him. I considered the question carefully. "Maybe one day," I said. "I just won't think about this anymore." That was the most honest answer I had. We went our separate ways. I haven't seen him since. In the weeks that followed, my life grew quieter. Therapy helped. Not because it erased what happened, but because it put language to it. Gaslighting, manipulation, boundary erosion. Naming those things made them smaller. Work stabilized. I received a small promotion. Nothing dramatic, just steady, earned. Dating didn't interest me yet. I tried an app briefly, deleted it quickly. I needed more time in my own head without scanning for red flags in every sentence. I heard updates through the grapevine. He moved back in with his parents, complained constantly about how unfair everything was, about how I'd ruined his future. A tiny part of me felt something like sympathy. Then I remembered the lease, the lies, the don't be insecure, and the feeling passed. These days my life is quieter. Not empty, just steady in a way it wasn't before. The constant background tension is gone. I don't wake up bracing for a text that might flip my mood for the entire day. I don't replay conversations in my head trying to figure out what I said wrong. Silence no longer feels like something I need to fill or defend. Therapy has helped more than I expected. Not because it erased what happened, but because it taught me to trust my internal signals again. To recognize that discomfort isn't weakness, it's information. I wasn't paranoid, I wasn't dramatic. I was responding to patterns my mind picked up long before I had proof. Work has become a place of stability again. I got a small promotion recently. Nothing flashy, but it came with a raise and a sense that my effort was being seen. I show up, I do my job, and I leave without carrying anyone else's chaos home with me. I'm not dating seriously yet. I tried for a couple of weeks, then realized I was still scanning every message for hidden meaning. That wasn't fair, to me or anyone else. So I stepped back. Healing doesn't need an audience. Occasionally, I still hear updates. He's struggling, still angry, still convinced life was unfair to him. I don't engage with that narrative anymore. It isn't mine to carry. What I do carry is clarity. I didn't destroy anyone's career. I didn't end a marriage. I didn't derail a future. I refused to be a financial safety net for a relationship I wasn't in. I refused to stay silent when my boundaries were treated as inconveniences. I refused to doubt myself when the evidence was right in front of me. If you're listening to this and something feels off in your own relationship, pay attention to that feeling. Especially if you're being told you're too sensitive or reading into things. Those phrases aren't reassurance. They're warnings. To everyone who reached out with support or shared similar stories, thank you. It helped more than you know to realize I wasn't alone in setting boundaries and enforcing them. If you've been through something similar, or if you're navigating a situation that doesn't sit right in your chest, feel free to comment below. Share your experience. You never know who might need to hear it. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight harder. It's to step back, tell the truth, and walk away with your dignity intact. Thanks for listening.